So, the first thing, when we look at Joshua 24, when it talks about then Joshua summoned all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, including their elders, leaders, judges, and officers. So they came and presented themselves to God. When I was reading that, the first thing that I thought of is it's time for a family meeting. Everybody say family meeting. Now, we're in family worship month, and a lot of us, when we think about our meeting times when we have with our families, sometimes they don't go the way that we are expecting. You know, you got some meetings that might be a little bit more informational, which is, those are sometimes the good ones. You have some meetings that's more like interventions, which, sometimes that can be the bad ones. And then you have some meetings where it's just like, hey, we just giving you some updates on what we're going to do next, which, that can be good. There can be some meetings where we're celebrating one or another. But this meeting that Joshua was having with the tribes, it seemed less like informational and more like a challenge. It was more a challenge and a charge. But what I realized when I was reading this was, as he challenged them, they were all facing their own issues and things like that, right? But he still remained who he was. And their issues and things that they brought into the family meeting did not change the purpose of the meeting. Oftentimes when we think about when we have a meeting, it can get real long-winded or whatever the case may be. I'll talk about my own family meeting. Sometimes I can get talking, and then as I talk, it can kind of deviate a little bit from what it was that we were originally supposed to talk about. And that's why you have to have like those administrative folk that can bring it back in and be like, hey, let's get back on task now. And sometimes we do, and sometimes, it is what it is at that point. I don't know what to tell you. But when I look at this text, and in the beginning, I watched Joshua begin to remind the people of the things that God has done. The first things that he begins to do, instead of challenging them, is reminding them what God has done, right? Right? All right, y'all got to talk to me. So in verse 3, it says this: "But I took your ancestor Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him into the land of Canaan. I gave him many descendants through his son Isaac." So the first thing that he reminds them of is, remember when I brought you out. There are times when, as you look at where they are right now, they are in that promised land. So there's a lot of things that has taken place and a lot of things that has transpired up until this point. But now they're in the place, this is the tribes, they're now all in their place where this should be like pretty easy going at this point. We should be relaxing. Our feet should be up, the hot tub should be going, the swimming pool's going. They didn't got all that back then, but just think about it. Let's put it in our context, all right? So we're looking at that, all right? And so then the first thing that he says is remember that God brought you out. Let's think about who he started with. And so he goes in and he says, let's go to Abraham. See, before Abraham, you had Abraham's father and his parents and ancestors. They all were not worshiping our God. They were worshiping little gods. They were worshiping idols. And God, with the desire and plan that he had, he snatched Abraham out and moved him away. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm going to talk about me. We're in Harrisonburg, right? All right. How many of us actually were raised in Harrisonburg? Raise your hand. Now, if you were not raised in Harrisonburg, raise your hand. All right. Now, have you ever asked, why are you here? Because I'm still trying to figure out sometimes how I ended up here. But I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, right? I tried to put the T on there, but usually it's Baltimore. But anyway, and so that's where I grew up. But God pulled me out of there and put me in a place in the Shenandoah Valley in this little teeny area called Bridgewater, which when I was driving down the road, it was actually the first time I'd seen a cow without going to like an actual like fair or farm. I was driving and there was one on the side of the road and I was like, that's interesting. And then the smells, bless the farmers in the room, but I can't do it. Shout out to Andrew Johnson. But, so you have Abraham, and God had pulled Abraham out. But along with pulling Abraham out, God also gave Abraham a promise. Everybody say promise. So the next thing that Joshua reminds the people is, remember that God fulfills his promises. How does he do this? Because then he mentions Isaac. Now we all understand that Abraham was an old man. An old man. I was about to call out some old people, and it was real hard for me not to call out. So anyway, I'm not gonna do it, Tiffany. No, but he was an old man, but God still made a promise and gave him a promise. Now, he tried to take matters into his own hands, unfortunately. But the thing is that God still fulfilled that promise. So even though he took matters into his own hands, when he got back obedient to what God was saying and got back obedient to what God was calling him to do, God gave him and fulfilled the promise through Isaac. And you begin to see that promise when Isaac has sons in Esau and Jacob, right? And then we know that Jacob was out here children galore. And, you know, there's some of y'all that I found have grown up with like 12 and 13 siblings. And I don't know what y'all parents was doing. But let me tell you, Lord Jesus. That's probably why people was farmers, though. That's probably why I get that work done. So you have this moment where he's talking about that. But then Joshua goes in again, verse 5, where he says, let me remind you again that God brought you out. See, when Jacob's son Joseph ended up having his family and all go into Egypt, as he began to lead that, he had the numbers begin to expand and grow, right? And so we have these wide numbers of people that is growing. And while they were there, they ended up being enslaved. And so as a result of that, Joshua reminds them, hey, let's not forget about Moses and Aaron, because Moses and Aaron was sent in and basically let my people go. Now, we heard that earlier this month with the Prince of Egypt that Pastor Chris preached on, and if you were here for the movie night, you got to see just a wonderful movie. It still is. It's still a very impactful movie, I guess. But so he has that moment. And then Joshua reminds them again. He says, also, remember that God will make a way. Because when he brought them out of Egypt, they came to a sea, and there was trouble in front, and there was trouble in back. And as they were at the sea, that's when he instructed Moses on what to do, and the sea parted. They walked on dry land, and as the Egyptian army was chasing after them, God closed the sea up, swallowed them, and they were set free. It was in that they became free, right? So then Joshua was like, but then also, remember when you were in the wilderness? Now, all these years in the wilderness, all the pain, all the annoying things that was taking place in the wilderness, people being disobedient, calves being created, tablets being broken, not them type of tablets, but, being broken, disobedience galore, but finally getting to a point where they finally were obedient and worshiping our God, and God was like, okay, now I can bring you out of the wilderness. And then you have another one where Joshua is reminding them, hey, remember the victories. Remember those times where you didn't have to do a thing. Remember the times where you came in and all you had to do was blow a horn, and I slayed the field. Remember the times where all you had to do was blow a horn and the walls came down. See, these are victories that Joshua is reminding the Israelites that they won. And oftentimes, when we get into our promised land, we forget how we got there. And so God was using Joshua to remind them, now don't get boastful, don't get prideful, don't get arrogant, and don't get lazy. Remember how you got here. When you start with the Spider-Man movie, in the beginning of the Spider-Man movie, this Into the Spider-Verse, it starts off with Peter Parker. Now, Peter Parker, he introduced himself, and he says, let's start the story. Let's begin. My name is Peter Parker. I am the one and only Spider-Man, and I am Spider-Man because I was bitten by one radioactive spider that transformed me into this. Now, through the years, I've been able to save many, many people. And if there's one thing that I've learned as Spider-Man, it's not about my skill, it's not about my talent, it's that I always get up. So one of the things that you're beginning to hear the moment the movie starts is the history of Spider-Man. That no matter the villain, no matter the enemy, Spider-Man continues to get up. Everybody say, get up. Oh, you got to get louder than that. Say, get up. Yes. So you're introduced to him, and that's Peter Parker. So Peter Parker, we find his story, and then all of a sudden we get introduced to this new character. Now, he's not Spider-Man yet, but his name is Miles Morales, all right? Now, that's everybody's fun Spider-Man. One, because he's young. He's a good-looking guy, nice family. You know what I mean? Real skinny. It's part of it's probably because of the movie. But anyway, he's real skinny, real thin, look like me. And so that's funny. And so he was excited. You have this movie where he's in school, and he's going to a new school, but he has no friends. He's alone and not enjoying himself. And one of the things that he mentions to his father is, Dad, I don't want to go to the school anymore because I don't have anyone there. And his dad is asking him questions, well, why not? Why not? And he's like, Dad, I want to be a man of the people. So here's the thing. Before he became Spider-Man, his heart was already for the people. Some of us, when we think about what God has placed inside of us, before he's called us to actually do anything, he's already given us the heart. Now, some of you right now, you're legitimately thinking, you're like, oh, Lord, what heart is he talking about? It's the heart for the people. Because we are servants of our King, it is love God and love God and love God and love. So one of the things that I looked at within this movie is I'm looking at this Spider-Man, and I'm like, man, okay. So Miles, he started off like that before he was given a gift, before he was given a talent, before he was given special powers. He just wanted to love the people. He just wanted to love the people. That's all he wanted to do. Well, when we fast forward, now we do realize that eventually here, he ends up getting bit by a radioactive spider. Now, we come to find out that this radioactive spider is not from his current dimension. It was from a separate dimension. Now, if I was to jump forward into the second movie, this is a huge plot for the entire second movie, all right? That's the only part of the second movie I'm going to tell you about. All right, and so back to the first movie. But when he gets bit by this radioactive spider, everything begins to change. Everything begins to change. He starts sweating more. He starts growing more. All of these crazy things begin to happen. But as he comes to the realization of what's happening, he's in his room. He has these papers, and it's a comic book. And one of his hands gets stuck on the paper, and when he rips it off, there's another page that reveals to him that the very thing that he's experiencing right now, Spider-Man had already gone through. So then he starts thinking, wait a minute. It don't make me Spider-Man, right? I mean, just because we have similar things, it don't make me. And so it made me think as far as with us as well. There are times where we can look at someone around us and we can see and we hear of their testimony, right? And then there's moments where right around the time where things is beginning to happen to us, we recall this moment that someone else has already gone through it. Someone else is already there. Now, the crazy thing to me is that the original Spider-Man, his words were, I'm the one and only Spider-Man. But then all of a sudden, here comes this new guy. Well, the new guy shows up at a fight that the original Spider-Man, Peter Parker, is fighting against the Green Goblin, and he gets hit. And Miles Morales begins to fall, and Spider-Man does what he does. Flung the web, grabbed him up, saved him, put him on a ledge. And it's a very cool thing that he did, because all of a sudden, they both had their little spider senses tingling, right? And when he had their spider senses tingling, Miles had no idea what it was, right? But Peter, who's already experienced it, who's already lived it, he looks at him and was like, you're just like me. When we think about community, when we think about us being here together, we gather together because we need to know, hey, you're just like me. You, hey, I seen that before. I seen that type of crying before. Yeah, I was talking about me. I'm not saying y'all was out here crying. Y'all already know. It just, And so it's this amazing moment that ends up taking place. And so Peter Parker's looking at him, and he's like, hey, like you're just like me. Okay, listen, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to teach you how to be Spider-Man. Now, this is crazy because he doesn't know him. But the immediate moment that he sees him, instead of him just being selfish and saying, oh, I want to remain the only one, he automatically goes into almost like a discipleship. Hey, let me, you know what? I see you new. I see you're new. Let me go ahead, let's go ahead and build together, all right? So you have this moment, and Peter Parker flies off, and he's like, I'll be right back, and when I get back, we'll be able to build together. Well, he gets into the battle again. There's this collider that explodes, and I'm speeding through stuff, and Peter ends up falling, and he gets hurt really bad, right? So he's laying there on the ground, and Miles comes up to him, and Peter gives him his last command. So Miles is walking up to him scared, frightened. And we know that Peter has already stated that one of the things about Spider-Man is that you always get up. But in this one moment, he starts realizing, hey, I can't move. I can't actually get up. I can't fulfill the very thing that it was that I was assigned to do. The mission that I was on, I'm not able to do it. But I know who is. So he automatically just turns right to Miles and he goes, hey. It's almost like saying, hey, training's over. Right now it's time for you to go ahead, take this disc and plug it into the collider so that you can stop what's happening. Now, Miles is new. He ain't really, swinging on webs or nothing. So when he looks up in the air, he's trying to figure out how he going to get up there, number one. So the first thing he goes is, nah, I'm not doing that. And so Peter looks at him again and he says, no. If you don't do this, the world will end. When we think about like some of our discipleship, we need to make sure that when we're discipling well, we let them know and let them understand the assignment that God has given, but also understand the commitment that God wants. So oftentimes we allow people to just get out there, but they don't understand what's happening here. They don't understand the ramifications. He could have just been like, hey, just put the disc in there and just left it. And it's like, no, I don't want to do it. And he's like, listen, I said put the disc in there, but that's not what he did. He never repeated that. What he said was, if you don't do, the world will end. Joshua here, when we look in the text, we recognize that there's a point here where in verse 14, Joshua says, so fear the Lord and serve him wholeheartedly. Put away forever the idols your ancestors worshiped when they lived beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt. Serve the Lord alone. But if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today whom you will serve. Would you prefer the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates? Or will it be the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live? But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now, one of the things that Joshua begins to also tell them in verse 19 is he begins to explain to them, okay, now I'm letting you know what I'm doing, but I got to let you know what it means when we say we're serving the Lord, right? Verse 19, it says, then Joshua warned the people, you are not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy and jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you abandon the Lord and serve other gods, he will turn against you and destroy you, even though he has been so good to you. So Joshua is reminding them, hey, listen, I know what God has already done. And he's blessed us mightily before. But that does not change that the moment you say you're desiring to serve him, there's a whole nother weight. There's a whole nother level of commitment that he's looking for. And if you're not really committed to this thing, don't accept it. Because if you accept it, now he's coming at you with the expectations that you are committed to the very things that he said. And one of the things that he said is, don't be a rebel. Don't rebel against him. Don't rebel against the leadership that he's put in place. He also said, don't worship idols. Now, we can talk about idols for days. We have tons of idols. We got social media, we got money, we got professions, we got businesses, we got spouses, we got relationships, we got children. It's a lot of idols that we create over time. We have ourselves, idols. And what he's saying is, no, you can't do that. Because the moment you do that, he's turning away from you. The moment you do that, you create the separation between you and him. While Peter and Miles were trying to figure out what to do here, of course, Peter, he's laying on the ground, and Miles pulls away the disc, and he runs out. And then this big villain, Kingpin, he is the most weirdly shaped villain I've ever, like his shoulders it was just, and then he had like a little teeny head. But anyway, so he comes up, and he's frustrated, and he's angry, and he ends up killing Peter Parker. And so Miles now is running, and he's now accepted the terms of the commitment, but he's by himself. And so he cries out. So the first thing he does is he calls his uncle. His uncle doesn't answer. He calls his dad. His dad doesn't answer. So he's alone. He's depressed. He recognizes that he's finally made a commitment to serve the people in this capacity with the gifts and talents that he's been given, but he has no one to teach him how to do it. And so you have this moment where he's in this graveyard after the funeral, and he's in this graveyard, and we've already mentioned that there are multiple dimensions, and out of nowhere, this guy who looks like Peter Parker comes and taps him on the shoulder. Now, by circumstance, I don't know if y'all have ever been by yourself and you didn't hear a person coming up behind you, but when they touch you, it kind of brings this level of like fight or flight. Well, he kind of fought, and he knocked him out. And an unfortunate case is that you see this whole scene where he's like dragging Peter Parker around the city, trying to escape the police officers that are trying to capture Spider-Man. So they finally get to a spot, and he's talking to Peter, and he's asking Peter, hey, well, now that you're here, now you'll train me. Well, there's a little difference here, because this Peter, he wasn't about that. See, the original Peter, he immediately said, I'll train you. This Peter was like, no, I ain't got time for that. I'm just trying to get home. See, this Peter was about himself. But his selfishness is also the things that was driving him at that point. When he explains his story, he says, oh, I am, bitten by a radioactive spider. I'm the only Spider-Man in my world, as well as I've saved hundreds and hundreds of people. I've done it again and again and again and again. And he goes on and on and on. And then finally he gets to a point, and he was like, but then I lost my love. So this Peter, unlike the other, had gotten to a point where he had been serving and he had been going about saving the world time and time again. And at a certain point, he lost the love for what he was doing. Now, I would venture to say that some of us, that's our story. We've been doing the things that God has required and asked us to do, but at a certain point, the zeal left. At a certain point, the joy left. At a certain point, 7:15 wake-up calls, 6:45 wake-up calls is just not, it's not what God wants for me to do anymore. And so we're unwilling to make the same sacrifices that got us here. We're unwilling to make the same commitments that got us here. See, what Joshua is trying to remind the Israelites of is that if you commit to this, it's for life. This isn't a commitment where you're saying, oh, God, I just want to do it today, but then tomorrow I'm going to make another decision. No, it's a commitment saying, God, if I serve you today, I'll serve you more tomorrow. I'll serve you even more tomorrow. I'll serve you even more the next day. I'll serve you even more the next year. Why? Because with each day that you live, God does so much more. And you get to see so much more. It's nothing better than coming in on a Sunday morning. We were in our Revive Treat yesterday, and so many people were saying, it's nothing better than coming in on a Sunday morning and seeing so many people impacted by the gospel. It's not about the music. It's not about the worship that we're doing up here. It's about the King. And when we all come in and we're all ready to worship and hands are lifted high and we're excited and we're jumping and we're running, I would love to see somebody run around in here. I just want to let y'all know that. And the day that happens, somebody else might run around too. I'm not going to say it's me because I got to play the keys. But it's somebody else going to run around too. But I'm excited about those things. And that's what Joshua is saying. He's saying the commitment that you guys have, like understand that it's not small. It's a big deal. It's a big deal to God for you to say, God, I'm going to serve you with my whole heart. So we look at the rest of this movie, and as it continues to go through, we have this moment later where Peter and Miles, they interact and end up trying to get some more information to be able to create this disc that they need to use to stop this collider, right? But beyond that, as they were trying to do that, the enemies begin to attack them, and this is when you're introduced to four more, Spider-Men. I'm not going to say all of them, but you have Penny Parker, you have Spider-Man, that is Peter Parker from like the 1930s, which he's like black and white, which is hilarious. And then like when they introduced him, like the wind was blowing, and it was like, why is the wind blowing on you? But we're inside, and he was like, the wind blows wherever I go. You have him. You have Peter Porker, which is like the fun one, and then you have Gwen Stacy, which is Spider-Woman that everybody knows, right? Side note, in the second movie, you'll get a lot more of her story. So if you just want to find out more about her, just go to the movie theaters and see, Gwen Stacy's story, because it's amazing and it will preach as well. But anyway, and so when we go through this, we see them begin to interact with all these Spider-Men. And there came a point in time where they realized what they needed to do was stop the collider. Now, the goal for everybody was to be able to get home. The goal for everybody was to be able to save the world. The goal for everybody was to stop the collider. But when they were interacting together, they realized everybody wasn't on the same level. See, you have this young guy, Miles, who can't control his powers, who doesn't understand his powers, who's not had a person really working with him and discipling and developing him to become the Spider-Man that he needs to be in order to be able to save the world. So they're all interacting together, and when they start realizing that he doesn't know what he's doing, they kind of push him aside, and they have a little meeting on the side, and they say, hey, listen, we don't think he's ready. And because we don't think he's ready, we can't send him out there. Because if we send him out there when he's not ready, he's going to die. Well, so then, as we speed up, there's a moment where all the Spider-Men are fighting, and they're fighting different villains or whatnot. And we have this moment here where Miles Morales and his uncle are battling one another. And you find out that Miles' uncle is a villain. But his uncle, with the compassion in him, could not kill his nephew. So then there's a portion there where the uncle ends up getting shot, unfortunately, by Kingpin, because he's a killer. And so he gets shot by Kingpin, and Miles is sitting with his uncle on the ground. And his uncle says this thing. Now, as much as his uncle was a villain, and as much as his uncle was doing all the wrong things, his uncle tells him, everything that I've done is because I just wanted to be a good role model for you. That's interesting, because he was doing the wrong things, but his desire was, I just want to do what's right for you, though. I want to set you up well. It makes me think of like when Joshua was talking to the people and he was reminding them of all the things that God has done. And it's one of those things where the uncle was telling him, hey, I know what I've done. And I've done what I've done so that you don't have to. I've done what I've done to create a way so that you would be able to do better than me. And then there's a word that he says to his nephew. He says, Miles, you're the best of all of us. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a parent look at you and tell you, you're the best of all of us. But I can only imagine this young kid who's now been kind of pushed to the side by the other Spider-Man, is now looking at this villain who's now telling him, you're the best of all of us. Now, what in the world can that mean? Well, we fast forward some more. And the Spider-Men, they've all gathered together, and they've made the decision, hey, Miles, you're going to stay back. So they tie Miles up, and they leave him. And as he's leaving, as they're leaving, Miles shouts this thing out to him. He says, Peter, before you go, you say I'm not ready. But how will I know when I'm ready? And Peter looks at him, and he says, Miles, you don't. It's just a leap of faith. Now, I venture to say that some of us, when we are thinking about serving the Lord, there's a portion of us that's saying, hey, we're not ready. I still have some things that I got to get in place. I got some relationships that I need to mend. I got some money that I need to make. There's some things in place there are some things that are not in place that I need to have done before I can commit to serving the Lord. But I venture to tell you this. It is a leap of faith. It's not your talent. It's not your money. It's not your gifts. It's not what you're bringing in. It's simply because you have a desire and a heart to serve him. So when we speed up here in this text, Joshua says this. He says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Down below it says in verse 21, but the people answered Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. This is after he's already given them, this is what it means to commit. They respond and say, we will serve the Lord. So then he says, okay, you are a witness to your own decision. You have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, they replied, we are witnesses to what we have said. All right then, Joshua said, destroy the idols among you and turn your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. So his last thing is, okay, if you say you're committed, then let go of some stuff. Let go of some stuff and turn to me. There's this scene here where Miles is sitting in the chair after he asked Peter that question and they've left. And he's sitting there and his father comes and knocks on the door. Now he and his father at this point were not having the best of relationships. And it just felt like they just kept missing one another. One would try to communicate, the other one would be gone. One would try to communicate, the other one would be gone. And it would happen time and time again. But one of the things that happens is Miles' mouth is now closed shut. And he's tied up in his chair, and he's in his room, and his father knocks on the door. Miles. No answer. Now, his father doesn't know what's happening on the inside. But he says, Miles, I know you may be hurting, but I love you. And I know you don't understand the things that I'm doing. But what I'm doing is for you, and it's because what I see in you is a spark that I know will lead you to doing greater things. Miles is sitting there, and he cannot respond. He can't move. He can't talk. But his father's speaking. I want to say this to you. Your father is speaking. See, some of us have been bound and we've been held in tight because we're hurting, we're in pain, we've had church hurt, we've had family hurt, we've got life hurt. There's been so many different things. But our God is knocking. And he's calling your name. He's calling your name. And he says, I love you. And I want you to understand that what I see in you is greatness. Now, he's not talking about just the fact that he put it in you, because he could brag about that. But he's not bragging. What he's talking about is that, man, you are such a blessing. What you have inside of you can change the world. Miles is sitting there, and as his father leaves, he recognizes, hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Now, my uncle said that I'm the best of my family. My dad says, oh man, I love you. My dad says, oh man, listen, what I see in you is greatness. So now he's been built up by the two men that mean the most to him in his life. But the last man that spoke to him was the mentor that came aside and said, son, it's just a leap of faith. I believe that today it's time to take a leap of faith. We're talking about we choose today to serve our God, right? You guys can bring it down for a second. We're choosing to serve our God, right? Okay, so listen to this. Miles, when he's sitting there, all of a sudden, this internal explosion happens where now the confidence that he has in what his father has said and the confidence that he has in who he is has merged into one. And when that moment happened, he broke out of his shackles. He broke out of his chains and he got up. Now, when he got up, he went back to the place where he was not accepted. And when he got to that place, the woman was sitting there and said, I've been waiting on you. Now, I believe that some of you today, we've been watching you. We've been watching you week after week after week. And we've given you the invitation week after week after week, and you just haven't been ready. But choose ye today whom you will serve. There's going to take a level of boldness and faith to make this move. Understand that Joshua, when he was talking to them, he said what he said, but he also said this, but as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. Some of you are sitting here and you're like, man, my spouse isn't ready. My child isn't ready. There are children that are saying my parents aren't ready. But I need you to take a leap of faith and say, as for me and my family, I'm stopping the curse. I'm stopping the plan of the enemy. As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. If you can stand on your feet. I want you to just close your eyes really quick because oftentimes we get distracted by those around us. Some of you are Miles. You've given your life to God recently, but you don't have a person to walk with you. And you're trying to do this thing and your joy is there, your zeal is there, your commitment is ready, but then you don't have a person that's just doing life with you. That's just telling you, hey man, this is what it looks like to read your word. Come on, girl, this is what it looks like to spend time praying to God. If that's you today, I want you to not worry about the people around you, and I want you to take a leap of faith and just bring yourself to the front. If you're the person that is saying, God, today I'm committing myself to not only serving you in my private life, but I'm committing myself to serving you publicly. And I want those around me to know so that they can hold me accountable. One of the things that the Israelites did when they agreed to committing to God and serving God, there was a commitment that they made, and they said, we will be each other's witnesses, that we will serve the Lord. The second one, maybe you're Peter, and you've been serving for year after year, week after week, and it's got exhausting. You've got nothing left to give. You're like, man, I gave God everything, and it feels like the more and more I give, the more he takes away from me. The more and more I lose, family members turning from me, friends turning their backs on me. I want you to understand that when you make a decision today that says, I desire to serve the Lord, we all together are your witnesses. And what that makes us is a family together, that we all together can say, hey, join us. Join us. And then the last one, some of you, maybe you're the other Spider-Man. Everything is going well. Life is good. You're serving the Lord. You just need an opportunity to be able to find a place to call home. Maybe you need an opportunity to return back. You're like, man, I've been serving at another church, and due to the church hurt, I left, and I won't pick it back up. Today's your day to get serving. We're going to put this QR code on the screen. And I want you guys to understand something. We're about to go to 3 services in the fall. And we have 3 services that we're doing. And I'm looking at our team. And in some of our teams, we've said, man, we're lacking resources. It's not that many of us. How are we going to do 3 services, Pastor Nate? And I said, God will provide. God is going to provide not because we need it. God is going to provide because the people that are coming, they need it. And you're here today simply because God is saying to you, choose ye this day whom you will serve. We can't sit on a bench anymore. We can't. We cannot not make an impact for the gospel. We can't. Because if we don't plug in the disc, when the world ends, the blood is on our hands. When the world ends and we see those relatives, we see those friends, we see those coworkers that did not encounter him simply because we wouldn't get in place, that's on us. And God is not going to give the responsibility to Pastor Gabe. It's yours. Pastor Gabe don't work where you work. You work there. Lolita don't go in your household. You live there. I don't raise your children. You raise your children. You want to break a curse? Take a leap of faith. You want your family to change? You want some things to flip for your household? Take a leap of faith. So at this time, if you want to take a leap of faith, I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to take it and make your way up to the front. We're going to pray out. And as we do this, I want you to not worry about music, not worry about what I have to do next. I want you to make a decision. Make a commitment today that says, God, I'm here to serve you. God, we thank you just for the opportunity we had to worship you. God, we recognize that many of us, with everything that we've experienced, everything that we've dealt with, God, you've kept us. God, we remember that we could have been one place, but you've allowed us to be in this one. And for that, we're grateful. God, I pray for boldness in your people, that there would be a lack of shame, that people would not be afraid to make a decision because of the requirements. People would not be afraid to make a decision because they feel like they're unqualified. People would not be afraid to make a decision to commit to you because they don't feel like they have what it takes. People would not be afraid to make a decision because they're so stuck on their own personal lives, God, that they can't serve you, that they can't serve your people. God, I pray against all of that. And I pray freedom for your people. Freedom in their homes, freedom on their jobs, for them to be able to share your gospel, for them to be able to do the work of the kingdom. God, we thank you, we honor you, and we praise you. It is in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.